From deep in the heart of West Texas, it's the Tim Kreitz Adventures Podcast. Talking motorcycles, music, beer brewing, pop culture, adventure, and all points in between. Now, here's your host, Tim Kreitz.
Well, greetings and salutations once again. Welcome to the Tim Kreitz Adventures Podcast. I hope everyone is doing well. Man, it has been a while since we did one of these, and I apologize for that, especially considering that you all have told me over and over again that you enjoy the radio podcasts. And more especially since they tend to do as well or better than some of the other types of content I post here to the channel. And that actually brings me immediately into the primary topic of discussion for today's podcast, which is to say that I have been going through a serious period of self-introspection lately, I guess you could say, with regard to the creative things I produce and send out into the world via the internet and other media. Specifically, I've been focusing on assessing and sort of deconstructing my own motivations behind the things I create in an effort to better understand just exactly why it is that I'm doing all this stuff. You know, a great man once said, we rarely understand our own motivations. And that's sort of, I think, what I'm trying to do is get to the bottom of that. Why do I play in a band and write and record music and dedicate so much time and effort to that when there's not nearly as much payoff as there used to be? Why do I produce my quirky little motorcycle ride videos and publish them to YouTube when they get 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 views at the most, by and large? I've had a few this year that have done better. I've got one that's at 15,000 or so and one that's closer to 20,000 or so from this year. But by and large, you know, this is not a huge channel, as you all know, my small, dedicated, wonderful audience of friends and acquaintances. There's questions like that. Why do I design and draw and all the other things that I do along those lines? All this creative stuff that I'm always doing, that I've managed to scratch a living out at for the past, 25 years. For a long time, I approached everything I do creatively from a strictly it's about the art and nothing else standpoint. So I guess to put it another way, I guess you could say I was a bit of a purist in some ways. That's maybe too strong of a word, but I just wanted to be able to make a living as a musician, producer, artist with little regard for things like fame and adoration and notoriety, etc. At least that's mostly how it seems in retrospect, with some admitted exception here and there. I mean, when you're a performer of any kind, there's part of you that always wants fame. But I'm really looking at this harder from a motivational standpoint, I guess from a psychological standpoint. As the years passed by doing this stuff for all these years, and I began to have limited or moderate success as a creative person, doing things like creating artwork and media for the advertising and marketing industry, producing and performing music that sold well, such as, between 2012 and 2017, when I was part of a nationally known band, and those kinds of things. I began to understand that I really liked the fame aspect of all that as more and more of it came my way. I liked being well known and hopefully respected by most for the things I did, and that over time sort of began to change my focus away from the purity of the creations themselves. It's like Neil Peart said, glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity. I thought a lot about the lyrics to that song lately too. But with all that in mind, I really started to get into tune, or trying to get into tune with that vibe, especially over the course of the past year. It really hit me this year that I was sometimes doing things just to draw attention to myself over creating something I considered substantive. And once I had made that realization and truly stared it in the face, I became somewhat, I guess, disappointed in myself. I reckoned that I had allowed the necessity to get my creative projects in front of people through attention to sometimes compromise the creations themselves. That's a tough little Zen riddle, I guess, isn't it? A creative person must figure out ways to get people's attention without allowing the attention itself to become the reason for creating. And I've been struggling with that for a while. Throughout 2018, I've been very mindful of it, and I've been very cognizant of it. It's been in the forefront of my mind. Why am I doing this? Because I always want what I create to be able to stand on its own merit and not be motivated solely by ego and things like that. So over the past few weeks in particular, I've been reading a lot of articles and academic papers on the psychology of fame seeking. Why are we all, to various extents, of course, depending on our own individuality, compelled by a desire for fame and adoration? What drives that? How much of it, if any, is natural and healthy? Most importantly, when does it become unhealthy? And in extreme examples, when does it become, say, sociopathic or even psychopathological? What I found in some of these writings was pretty interesting to me, and so I thought I would share some of the ideas with you. The first thing I started researching was what I consider to be the most extreme version of fame seeking, and that is simply fame for its own sake. We've all known at least one person in our lives, and probably way more than just one, depending on what types of people you associate with as peers or colleagues, who just freaking want to be famous. They have no outlying talent or skill, no endearing or charismatic propensities, nothing like that. They are literally just the average Joes and Jones of the world who, for whatever strange reason, have decided that they deserve to be famous. YouTube's littered with channels like this. I mean, you guys, I don't have to tell you, especially those of you who are creators yourselves, because we tend to keep our thumb on the pulse of what's being created on YouTube, and there's a lot of it out there, but it's not only YouTube. Look at Instagram, look at Snapchat. It's a pandemic. So here's kind of what I found. Now, I could go through here and read excerpts from these articles verbatim, but I don't really want to do that. However, in the spirit of being at least somewhat thorough, I'll tell you that these articles and papers I'm referencing came from, let's see here, Psychology Today is one of the sources, the New York Times is another source, Oxford, a few other academic sources, things in places like that. And the overwhelmingly common opinion of most of these pieces is that those who seek fame solely for its own sake are doing so based on some sort of calamity or dysfunction at some point in their lives, usually going back to either childhood or early adulthood, though not exclusively. I'm talking about things like rejection, abandonment, or in like worst case instances, abuse, severe neglect, stuff like that. The list goes on. But dysfunction is the widespread hinge of agreement amongst all of this stuff I've been reading. There's something about the monolithic quest for fame on its own that those people seem to be using as a mechanism for assigning meaning, value, and self-worth to themselves and to their lives. Now, keeping that in mind, let's look at how many people from Generation Y, that's the millennials, are seeking fame for its own sake as a percentage of the whole. According to various sources, including, I've got Forbes here, Fox, and a few others, I sort of amalgamated some of this information, so I don't exactly know which attribution goes with which, but just what I'm looking at here. 1/3 of millennials say they'd rather have fame than be a profession such as a doctor, attorney, or scientist. Think about that. 1/3 would rather be famous than have a career like that. Over 20% said they would rather be a celebrity than be happily married to a loving partner for the rest of their life. Think about that one. Over 20%, 1/5, would rather have fame, to be a celebrity, than be happily married in a loving, committed relationship for the rest of their life. Man, how shallow can you get? The question is obviously rhetorical. Let's see, there are several more here among these. They all follow along about the same lines too, but here's the big one. This is the one I really wanted to share with you. This is the one that shocked me the most. 1 in 10, 10%, 1 in 10 said they would disavow their own families for fame. That is astounding. A full 10% of millennials would write off their own flesh and blood to be a celebrity. I'm not sure if that's an indictment on the state of the family in the Western world at this point in history. I don't know if it has to do with our general godlessness at this point or whatever, but that's very, very sad, regardless of how you choose to look at it. Just on the face of it, that is extremely sad. So combine all this with recent studies showing how most people in America are lonelier than ever. I was watching a Joe Rogan podcast not too long ago where they were talking about that. They're doing all these studies and questionnaires recently, asking people how lonely they are, how many people they have in their lives that they could count on if they really, really needed someone. And you would be amazed at how many of those people say, I don't have anybody. I don't have any friends. I'm completely lonely. I don't have anyone I can count on. How sad is that? In a country of over 300 million just in the United States alone. We're more isolated than ever, and yet people are still willing to do all this stuff for fame, for the adoration of people they don't know. All this in the instant communication and information age, rather. It's so freaking strange. But where all this resolves for me is at the cruel false altar of fame itself. Man, fame is a fool's pursuit. I wish I had learned that earlier in my life. It is a fool's pursuit. It's a deal with the devil in many ways. And if there's one thing I've learned being around the music industry in particular, on and off at the professional level for, over 25 years now, it's that fame is fleeting and that the ego is a liar. Your ego tells you things that make you make bad decisions. Your ego tells you it's trying to protect you and do what's best for you, but really it's betraying you. And it's causing you to lose friends and lose close relationships and lose trust and lose respect. Your ego is a liar. Anytime your ego pipes up and tries to get you to do something, tell it to screw off. Look at how many troubled people that fame did in. People who had a legitimate talent, by the way, not just people who wanted to be famous for no other reason than to be famous, but they had a legitimate talent that got them tons of fans, recognition, fortune, on and on. But ultimately, they became further burdened in life by that fame, and it hastened their demise. Elvis comes to mind. Kurt Cobain comes to mind, just to name a couple, not to get too deep into that subject, because I know that's a whole other subject by itself, but still, you get what I'm driving at. When you really think about it, fame is nothing. It's like that old proverb that goes something along the lines of, most people spend their whole lives working at a job they hate to make more money than necessary to buy things they don't need so they can impress people they don't like. Fame, in and of itself, is a bit like that. Why do so many of us seek the adoration of people we don't even know? Why do we struggle with that compulsion, which is on some levels even a bit irrational? Shouldn't the love and respect of our close friends and family be what matters? Shouldn't productive time spent with colleagues we respect, shouldn't that be more valuable? Shouldn't service to others factor in there somewhere? Shouldn't it be a much stronger drive than the satisfaction of our own egos? We're a strange bunch of creatures, we human beings. I'll tell you that. So, to sort of conclude on this subject, I have resolved in the coming year to approach everything creatively, every one of my creative efforts, I guess you could say. Every creative effort I engage in, I'm going to approach it based on its own artistic merit and upon any intrinsic value I can endue it with that will be legitimately valuable to other people. That's a tall order. That's going to be tough. It's probably something I'll fail at, but I'm sure gonna try. It's going to be especially tough for me being a naturally ego-driven artist and human being, but I'm determined to use these, I guess, revelations, if you can call them that, for genuine self-improvement. And hopefully I won't fail. Hopefully I will succeed. The funny thing is, all this introspection about fame for its own sake and creating quality media on my part comes at a rather strange time for me, because I want you all to know that I am legitimately struggling to come up with interesting ideas for things like motorcycle ride videos and stuff like that on this channel right now. I have been that way pretty much all year long, if I'm honest with myself. To tell the truth, that was one of the major reasons why I haven't produced as much content in 2018, in addition to, of course, being locked into a full-time 9-to-5 for the past almost year and a half and dealing with my dad's health problems, as some of you out there know about. I think I'm just a little burned out right now, maybe. And that happens with anything like this eventually. It's just the way things go. Here's an example. So Cliff and I, we rode out to Shafter Dry Lake for the first time in almost 3 years. We did this just this past Sunday, and I filmed the whole ride day. I shot cinematics, I vlogged on the bike, all that stuff that I normally do. But when I got the raw footage transferred from the cameras onto my editing computer and watched all of it, I completely felt as if there was no reason whatsoever to edit it together. I was struggling to talk on camera and find interesting things to say. It was a place I've been to twice before in Tim Kreitz Adventures episodes, and I was ultimately just let down with everything I got. I just wasn't feeling myself. I wasn't feeling it the whole day, I guess you could say. I even told Cliff when we were out there at Shafter, I was like, man, I just want to ride today. I don't feel like being on camera. I don't feel like talking. I just don't feel like shooting anything. Maybe it was just a bad day, but I think it's actually just an amalgamation of a lot of the things I've been going through all year in 2018, just sort of struggling creatively. And maybe that's what's put me in this whole mindset about fame and my motivations. I don't know. I mean, it could all be tied together as far as I know. But anyway, all that data is just sitting on my computer, all that footage. It's just sitting there mocking me at this point. And I have absolutely no desire whatsoever to put it together into an episode. I don't know what's wrong with me, you guys. I can't figure out if I'm going through some sort of changes or if I'm just cognizant at this point that I need to change some things. And perhaps that's what's hindering me. I'm not sure if I need to reinvent my normal formulas for creating episodes. I don't know if I need to come up with some sort of new format that fires me up. I'm just struggling right now. It's like the YouTube content creator version of writer's block, I think. That's kind of how I've been thinking of it. So I think what I might need to do is just sort of back off a little bit more from shooting video until maybe, I don't know, after the end of the year. See if I can come up with some new ideas that inspire me. I mean, it's likely that I will shoot at least one more writing video between now and then, because I feel like I do have this one pretty halfway decent idea that will be fun and interesting. But maybe after that, I just need a sabbatical or something. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments section. I definitely want to keep making Tim Kreitz Adventures videos. I love doing it. I just need to shake things up, I think. Something like that. All right, let's take a quick little news break and then come back for one more segment. I have a few other topics that are more lighthearted, by the way, that I want to discuss with you guys, and I think it should be interesting. So stick around. We'll be right back.
The Tim Kreitz Adventures podcast will return after this short break. Stay tuned.
With SRN News, I'm Keith Peters in Washington. It looks like there could be some relief next week for firefighters battling the blazes in Southern California. But Los Angeles County Fire Chief Darrell Osby says the forecast raises worries about deadly slides like the ones that killed at least 20 people in Montecito last year.
Sometime next week, we're going to be expecting our first rainfall for the year, which will be helpful for our firefighters, but as seen by the experience in the Thomas fire from last year, that could potentially create some concerns with mud flows.
In Southern California, 2 people have been reported dead as a result of the devastating wildfires. In Northern California, however, the death toll is much higher. The Camp Fire has killed some 44 people, most of whom were trying to escape the blaze. Britain and the European Union have struck a proposed agreement deal for the UK's smooth exit from the bloc.
The British government confirmed the draft agreement. Its cabinet will hold a special meeting tomorrow for evaluation. The main obstacle has long been how commerce and customs will be conducted after Brexit between Britain's Northern Ireland and EU member Ireland. British support isn't guaranteed, nor is the European Parliament's, nor are all of the 28 EU nations. Brexit's date is next March 29th. George Bonzani reporting.
President Trump announced his pick to fill the appeals court seat previously held by Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
The president is nominating administration official Naomi Rao for the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. She currently serves as the administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which is part of the White House Budget Office. Rao previously worked as a professor at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University. She also served in President George W. Bush's administration and worked for the Senate Judiciary Committee. Greg Clugston, the White House.
On Wall Street, the Dow down by 100 points, the Nasdaq unchanged, the S&P lower by 4. This is SRN News.
And now, back to the podcast. Here's Tim.
Such a sad deal out there on the West Coast with all those fires. California, best wishes to all of you who have been affected. I won't get political and talk about how California's forestry practices, or the lack thereof, have made those fires so much worse than they needed to be. That's another subject for another time. But just hang in there, California. And as I said, man, best wishes to you all. Now that we're done with the existential portion of the broadcast today, I have some very exciting news for you all. I am working on getting another project bike. It's a 77 Kawasaki, and I'm going to look at it this week. Those of you who are familiar with the channel and my other social media will remember that I sold my painstakingly restored 1978 KZ1000 that I worked so hard on a few years ago, and I have regretted that decision tremendously ever since. This 77 is a KZ. It seems like it might be in better shape than the 78 was when I bought it and started the restoration of it. So fingers crossed that I'll be producing a documentary on restoring another old Kawasaki this coming year. And note that I am emphasizing the concept of making a single, longer format documentary film about the bike, not 3,000 installments on this channel and calling it a bike build series. That's so freaking lame when motorcycle channels do that. There have been some exceptions I've enjoyed, but by and large, the whole build series thing has been abused for the purpose of getting views and making money off of YouTube. And to make things worse, a lot of these guys who are doing these so-called bike build series are guys who have little to no mechanical ability whatsoever, or they're learning as they go. They're complete hacks, just ham-fisted know-nothings. And I get so sick of seeing that crap. So rest assured, if I can work out a fair deal on this motorcycle, I will be doing all the work with hopefully a little assistance here and there from a couple of very experienced expert motorcycle mechanics who happen to be close friends of mine, and likely a professional painter as well, because I want the paint on this thing to be flawless when I get to that point, and if I'm honest, I'm not a painter at all. In fact, I suck at it. The greater point being that the bike is going to be done right, and I'll hopefully have it in my loving possession for years and years to come. These old UJM era bikes, especially the ones from the 1970s, are getting to be harder and harder to find and purchase, especially ones that are decent candidates for restoration or refurbishment. So I'm super amped about getting a shot at bringing another one of these bikes into the stable. So fingers crossed for sure. Fingers crossed. Oh, and on a related note, speaking of Kawasaki, have you guys seen the 2019 W800 Cafe Racer that Kawasaki is coming out with? I am jazzed about this bike. I loved the W650 when it came out. It was in the United States in 2000 and 2001. I think it had a longer run in a few other countries, and then they sort of took it away. I think it had a pretty long run in Europe and in the UK especially. A really nice homage to their W series bikes of the 1960s, and sort of in a lot of ways a carbon copy of a Triumph Bonneville. And I keep looking at that W800 Cafe Racer and thinking to myself, boy, that would look really, really nice alongside my Bonneville in the stable. I have no idea how much they're going to be. If it's a retro bike these days, the starting price seems to be about $10,000, which is ridiculous, especially for something like a W800 or even a Bonneville for that matter. But, inflation and times change, and motorcycle volumes and sales volumes are lower than they used to be. So you're not getting the economies of scale as a consumer that you once got. I mean, if we had twice as many people riding motorcycles, they wouldn't be quite as expensive, but that's just kind of where we are right now. Anyway, I wanted to put a bug in your ear about that W800 Cafe. I think that Kawasaki did so well with the Z900 RS and the Z900 RS Cafe that they are looking at ways of bringing back some retro designs and giving them that cafe spin, and hopefully they'll sell really well. And I'm hopeful that we will get the W800 Cafe here in the States. I would love to take a test ride on one and all that, although I will be knee deep in a restoration hopefully by that time. So my motorcycle budget will have the brakes put on it by my wife. And here we go once again, ending up with 4, 5, 6 bikes in the stable, as I have had happen before. I told myself for the longest time I was going to have only 3 motorcycles at a time. That was my cutoff, 3, and now here I am about to bring a 4th one in and looking at other new bikes. So it's a sickness. What can I say? If you're listening to this channel and you like motorcycles, you know what I'm talking about. You want every one of them that you see. All right, I need to wrap up this little podcast, but quickly and lastly, I want to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram at Tim Kreitz Adventures, and you can friend me or follow me on Facebook at The Real Tim Kreitz. If I get that old Kawasaki this week, I will most definitely be posting a picture or two of it online, as you might imagine. So if you're interested in seeing where that saga begins in photographs and other explanation, just hit me up at either of those 2 social media platforms. I'll be glad to add you as a friend on Facebook. I recently cleared out about 1,000 people, so I've got some headroom for some cool folks if you want in. Always, thank you guys so much for being a part of the family and tuning in to see my videos and listen to my radio podcasts, all this stuff. It means more to me than I can say. And don't forget that you can hear me on terrestrial radio this Saturday night as I guest host the Spirit of Radio show on FM 107.1 KWEL here in West Texas. I will put a link to that radio station's streaming site in the description for those of you who are outside the listening area and want to tune in. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves, take care of one another. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. See you next time.